So President Trump is on his way back to Washington this morning after a 4-day tour of the Middle East. Now, prior to departing the UAE, he spent the day meeting with Abu Dhabi's president and business leaders at the city's presidential palace. It's the third and final leg of the trip. It follows jam-packed stops in Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
So the president's time in the Persian Gulf was filled with lavish welcomes, promises of big business deals, and attempts at international diplomacy. On the trip, the administration pressing Iran, Savannah, on a nuclear deal, announcing plans to lift sanctions on Syria, and even weighing in on talks currently underway right now in Turkey to end Russia's war in Ukraine. NBC News correspondent Alice Barr joining us now from Washington with the very latest. Alice, good morning.
Good morning, Sam and Savannah. Yeah, President Trump is now headed home on Air Force One, but not without making some final headlines about trade deals and a week that's been heavily focused on doing business with the United States. President Trump headed home from his Middle East trip after a final cultural tour and business roundtable in the United Arab Emirates, where he announced that with too many countries wanting to make a trade deal at once, his administration will start sending out letters.
Telling people what they'll be paying to do business in the United States. I guess you could say they could appeal it, but for the most part, I think we're going to be very fair.
That after the UAE president announced plans to invest $1.4 trillion over 10 years in U.S. industry, including energy and AI.
We will work very hard to deserve it.
It caps a week of deals in 3 wealthy Gulf states alongside diplomacy, pushing Iran to negotiate to abandon its nuclear program.
They're not going to make, I call it, in a friendly way, nuclear dust.
All while weighing in on talks underway to end Russia's war on Ukraine.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together.
All right, so Alice, what are some of the broader takeaways here from this trip concerning President Trump's foreign policy plans?
Yeah, I think we did learn a lot. And a comment I'm taking away is President Trump saying that America has no permanent enemies in talking about negotiating with Iran. He also said that past administrations had been too apt to intervene in the Middle East. He agreed to lift sanctions on Syria, long in place, while pressing its president to normalize relations with Israel. But on the flip side of that, he also was quick to say that on Iran, if they don't do this the nice way through negotiations, that there is a violent step, he said, to get them to agree to give up their nuclear weapon ambitions. He said he did not want to have to go to that step.
All right, Alice, thank you very much for kicking us off this morning. Well, it's not a not-so-happy Friday for thousands of commuters here in the New York City area. They're facing a major travel disruption. It's after members of the Railroad Engineers Union for New Jersey Transit went on strike overnight. This is the first walkout in more than 40 years. The Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen said its members were walking off the job after contract talks over wages collapsed late last night. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa has the latest.
Hey there. Well, the governor of New Jersey is urging people who rely on these trains to work from home if they can. That's just how big of a disruption is anticipated from this strike, the first statewide strike in more than 40 years here, with the train engineers belonging to New Jersey Transit walking off the job. You can see some of them starting to gather in the picket lines behind me, and the impacts are expected to be far-reaching. Some 350,000 people across the state rely on New Jersey Transit train lines to get to places like New York City, Philadelphia, to traverse the Garden State. But it's not just the daily commuters who will be scrambling to find other options. People also use these trains to get to, say, the airport or to major concert venues. So a lot of these people are now going to be hitting the road, getting on buses, getting behind the wheel, already adding to the already congested area. Now, the sticking point has been over wages. New Jersey Transit train engineers say they want competitive salaries, but the state and New Jersey Transit says that they need to do some cost-cutting measures, urging the engineers to return to the negotiating table. Negotiations are expected to resume on Sunday morning. Back to you.
Thanks, Emily.
See how long this takes. Thanks, Emily. And other travel news, because the headaches don't just stop there this morning. It's disruptive. We're learning of yet another air traffic control outage, this time in Denver, which is a critical airport hub for both United and Southwest Airlines. This happened at Denver Center on Monday. That center controls high-altitude flights in and around Denver International. It is the nation's third busiest airport. The FAA says the controllers lost several radio channels that allow them to communicate with pilots. That outage lasted for 90 seconds, and controllers had to switch to a backup frequency. Now, notably, the controllers never lost their radar contact, and planes did remain separated. Of course, this all follows on the heels of the recent news at Newark with outages there that have contributed to hours-long delays.
Well, the former girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs, Cassie Ventura, will take the stand again today to face her second day of cross-examination in Sean Diddy Combs' federal sex trafficking trial. It comes after Combs' defense team questioned her for hours yesterday, calling into question her actions during their relationship. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas has the latest from the courthouse, and some of this may be disturbing.
Cassie Ventura back on the witness stand, this time facing cross-examination from Sean Combs' lawyers. His defense team fighting back against testimony that Ventura was forced to participate in drug-fueled sexual encounters known as freak-offs. Combs' team submitting often explicit text messages and emails sent between the former couple into evidence. In one, Ventura writing to Combs in 2009 after they had been dating for 2 years, "I'm always ready to freak off." In another that same year, she writes, "When we used to freak off, when we were so in love, there were no questions asked. It felt right." When asked by Combs' lawyer about a text from 2017 where she said she loved freak-offs, Ventura said they were just words at that point.
There's a chance that one or more of the jurors might hear this evidence that she came back time and time again to Combs, that she participated in these freak-offs. And some of the jurors may conclude that this was more of a choice than it was coercion.
The defense team also asking about the couple's infidelity on both sides, seeming to paint the relationship as deeply troubled but consensual. Cassie said Combs kicked her in the back after finding out she cheated on him with rapper Kid Cudi, also admitting that she was jealous of a relationship Combs was having with another woman. She also spoke about the couple's extensive drug use and revealed Combs overdosed on painkillers in 2012. She said drug dependence influenced some of the rapper's mood swings and also spoke again about her own drug addiction. Ventura's cross-examination comes after 2 days of emotional testimony in which she said Combs subjected her to years of physical and psychological abuse. Testifying that Combs blackmailed her with recordings from sexual encounters to silence her and keep her in the relationship. Combs has pleaded not guilty and says the freak-offs were consensual.
So one thing that I just want to point out is that we know that Cassie is pregnant with her third child, but she might give birth imminently, according to prosecutors, and they want her off the stand before the weekend. And this is something that Combs' legal team has been trying to fight against. They want their opportunity to cross-examine her, and they don't want to be rushed. Back to you.
All right, Chloe, thank you so much. Well, now we are joined by NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. You, of course, just saw him in that piece. He's everywhere for us all the time. He's here in studio this morning. Okay, so let's talk through this cross-examination. First, I thought it was also sort of notable that the judge was like, this will wrap up by Friday, as Chloe just mentioned there, for Cassie's sake, given that she could go into labor soon. But we saw them pull up her text messages. She had to read some of them. They were read to her. What was successful, do you think, from the defense? And we also talked about how they're going to have to toe this line of, like, being, you know, somewhat respectful, maybe kind of gentle given the nature of this, but also try to make their case. Do you think they did that?
Yeah, first, you mentioned the timing of the witness examination. Now, the judge has considerable discretion to control the length of cross-examination. But I have to tell you, I am a defense attorney, but I did side with the defense on this issue, that it's the prosecution that chose to bring this case. It's their witness. They chose to call a witness who is 8 months pregnant. And if she suddenly goes into labor, that's the equivalent of as if she had taken the Fifth Amendment. In other words, it would deny the defense the opportunity to cross-examine and confront and present a defense. Those are all constitutional rights that could be violated. Now, I understand the judge does have discretion in this area, but I think hurrying them along is something that defense attorneys, it's the bane of our existence. Now, you ask about cross-examination. The challenge for the defense here is how do you do it delicately and gently, but also in a firm way, because they have a duty, defense attorneys, to explore her memory, her motive, and probably the most important, her decisions. And I know this may be unpopular, and I know that many people recognize that victims of domestic violence cannot get away from their abuser. But the reality is there may be one or more of those jurors that is saying to themselves, I don't know, this freak-off lifestyle, I don't get it. And I see that she went back to him on numerous occasions. Now, again, that could be a victim under the Svengali hold of Diddy Combs, or it could be someone who is making deliberate, independent choices to return to this situation.
With that framework, Savannah mentioned the text messages, right? And so that was brought up yesterday, the text messages that the defense was saying, look, Cassie is acknowledging participation, looking forward, in her own words, to these events. How pivotal could that be? Because, Danny, I know you also mentioned the fact that it's one thing to look at a transcript, and it's another the inflection and the body language when she's on the stand. What's your takeaway there?
Exactly right. And because we don't get cameras in federal court, we're left with sort of the reporting on the transcript. But I was there yesterday, and you could hear her response. And you know what's interesting? Everybody brings their own life experiences when we observe people. And we all think we have this sort of lie detection hardware in our brains. And to some degree, we do through evolution. But it's not infallible. And so the way she responded, I wouldn't say she responded in a bad way, but she's quiet. She pauses a little between questions. You could see that either as she's thoughtful about her answers, or you might see, I could imagine a juror saying, she seems a little too flat. I'm not so sure I find her credible. My point is this. Jurors are charged with determining credibility. Credibility is at the core of every witness's testimony. And the way by which we do that is not very scientific. It's instinct, and human instinct has a lot of problems with it.
Danny, the big question here, as we discussed yesterday, is you may hear a lot of these details and think, okay, he's a bad guy. Even by the defense's own admission, domestic violence was present. Those are not the same as racketeering. Those are not the same as what he's being charged with, and therefore, ultimately, will he be found guilty on? Do you think, from what you've heard so far, from a star witness, there's a lot to come, but from someone who the prosecution is resting a lot on, that they are getting nearer to actually proving what he is charged with?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, the federal government has never shied from overkill. They are laying on all of the evidence. And by the way, Cassie, in my view, isn't even the most important witness for the government in terms of elements. They will bring on other witnesses. And by the way, the prosecution doesn't put all their eggs in the basket of Cassie Ventura. We know that because they've superseded the indictment and they have more victims coming in to testify. So they're going to put on their case to prove all of the elements of the crimes. And you correctly pointed out, this is not a domestic violence case. This is not a rape case. Those crimes are sort of sub-elements of the greater federal crimes. So they do have to be proven as to some of the elements. But that is one of the defense's central themes, which is you may hate my client. You may think he's a horrible person. You may think he's guilty of assault, rape, and some of these other misdeeds. However, that is not what he's charged with here today. And that is probably their best path.
Diddy, by the way, was offered a plea deal and rejected it. What's the mandatory minimum, just to remind our viewers that he could be looking at if he's convicted?
The only crime with a mandatory minimum in this case is the trafficking. It has a mandatory minimum of 15 years. That means the judge has zero discretion. When you talk about statutory maximums, though, with federal cases, the only number we could know now is by adding them all up end to end to end, because in theory, he could get consecutive sentences if he's convicted. And that number is usually approaching infinity or life in prison. And that's probably what he's looking at. In reality, the sentencing guidelines might be lower, but really they might not, because these are all pretty serious crimes. The only knowable number now really is the maximum, but also the statutory minimum, and that is a really important number for Diddy to be thinking about.
Danny Savalos, we appreciate you as always. Thank you so much.
Double Danny, always a good day. Thank you, sir. Well, it was also a contentious day at the Supreme Court yesterday, with the justices hearing arguments over the future of birthright citizenship in America and whether federal judges can put a stop to actions or issue a so-called national injunction in response to an executive order from the president. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett explains.
It's a case with potentially enormous ramifications for the powers of the presidency, impacting everything from immigration to federal funding to even diversity in schools.
The high-stakes clash between the White House and the federal courts reaching the Supreme Court.
Presidents want to get things done.
The Trump administration hoping to convince the justices that a single federal judge in a single state has no authority to block an executive order for the entire country. President Trump facing nearly 40 so-called nationwide injunctions on a host of issues so far in his second term, particularly on immigration. including lower courts blocking President Trump's executive order stripping birthright citizenship for children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants. The court's conservative majority seeming open to the administration's arguments on the dangers of judicial overreach.
There are 680 district court judges, and they are dedicated and they are scholarly, and I'm not impugning their motives in any way, but sometimes they're wrong.
But some liberal members of the court grilling the administration on what happens if judges cannot block an executive order they believe is illegal on a nationwide basis.
Let's just assume you're dead wrong. Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit?
Democratic state officials arguing a patchwork of citizenship would emerge if the administration wins here, with rights varying from state to state. Still, there has been bipartisan criticism of judges abusing nationwide injunctions, incentivizing so-called judge shopping for sympathetic courts.
We are being hit hard by judges that I think they're trying to take away the power of the presidency.
As for when we expect to see a decision from the High Court here, they typically issue the biggest rulings of the term the last week of June or first week of July. Back to you.
We're keeping track of that, Laura. Thanks so much.
Well, it has been a week of rough weather for much of the United States, and it continues today as more than 70 million people remain under the threat of severe storms. At least 9 suspected tornadoes, like this one that you see on your screen right now, this was in western Wisconsin, were spotted across the Midwest yesterday. Luckily, no serious injuries were reported.
Scary, Savannah, nonetheless. And in Chicago, the strong storms there had fans at Beyonce's Cowboy Carter concert sheltering in place, as you're looking at some of that video, as Soldier Field was hit with strong winds and rain just as the Queen Bee was set to take the stage. Do not mess with the beehive if there's a takeaway here. Luckily, the skies eventually cleared and the show went on.
Look at the rain on those stairs. My goodness. All right, well, let's get a check on what to expect this weekend after a week of severe storms with your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman joining us now. Is there some good news in the forecast here? Or more
for a
of this?
weekend.
Guys, there's always good news somewhere in the country when it comes to the weather. I will deliver that at the end, because first we've got to deal with all the bad news I have this morning, which is thunderstorm watches that are in effect across parts of the Tennessee Valley. You can see this line of thunderstorms has really ramped up. Plenty of lightning associated with that. And we do have some thunderstorm warnings embedded in there as well. We started off the morning with some tornado watches across parts of the Great Lakes. Those have since expired, but we're really essentially going to see things ramp up again, especially as we get into the afternoon hours. And again, from the Ohio Valley to the Tennessee Valley, we'll still see the rain and the wind for the upper Midwest. That's not going anywhere thanks to this storm system that's just kind of hanging around. But specifically Evansville and Nashville, that's where we have that moderate risk. So the greatest chance for us to see some of those stronger tornadoes, the hail and the wind. But this is pretty expansive today. More than 70 million people included in the potential for severe weather. It goes from Washington, D.C. all the way to Dallas. And specifically, again, we are concerned about those larger tornadoes across parts of the Tennessee Valley, St. Louis to Nashville and out toward Lexington, all included in that threat. By tomorrow, that area looks a lot better. So there's some good news for folks there, but we start to see things ramping up in other spots. It's not going to be quite as expansive, and we'll still have the potential to see some of these stronger storms, specifically parts of the Southern Plains, Dallas and Little Rock included in that, and then stretching from the Northeast to the Mid-Atlantic, again, some hail, maybe some damaging winds and a couple of tornadoes. But we're most concerned about the hail risk across parts of the Southern Plains for tomorrow. By Sunday, more of those storms are going to erupt across, you guessed it, the plains. That's where we'll see the most active kind of wrap up to our weekend. That severe threat will last from Nebraska to Texas, Wichita, right in the bullseye of that. Big picture look, though, for our temperatures. Boy, it feels like summer. I don't know who turned up the heat, but they're really feeling it across Texas specifically. 98 degrees in San Antonio today. We could see some record-breaking temperatures once again across the southern tier of this region. 97 in Jacksonville, and even as far north as Detroit, temperatures running 15 degrees above normal. So it's mid-80s today for your high there. We keep the East Coast in on this action as we get into tomorrow, too. Mid-80s for Washington, D.C., triple digits for San Antonio, 90s for Dallas, near 90 for Nashville. As we head into the end of our weekend and into early next week, guys, it'll stay warm, still shorts and T-shirt kind of forecast. So there is your good news, because you see what I did? I didn't tell you needed a jacket. Yeah.
I also feel like we've been fighting this rainy pattern. It has not been warm. It has not felt like spring.
No, but don't worry. 90s in Texas. You could go there.
There we go.
When you have
want to go back to the Lone Star States. Florida, we have a Florida
good news.
Yes.
I don't know how good it is. That looks pretty good, though, actually.
This is the art of being a meteorologist.
Very delicately done.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.